see the harm in setting up a procedure whereby in further occasion where there appears to have been some unfairness of taking a look at it.
Congressman, I would seek the Inspector General's counsel on that.
Mr. Denson, go out.
I think the situations that you're referring to are exactly those that we've agreed to or look at in our follow-up.
Well, you look at them in the follow-up. You're not empowered to relitigate them.
No,
But you have identified some that you think were, again, not huge amounts maybe, but you found some that you think you can follow up. So then, Dr. Tango, if they were to be followed up and found to have been unfair and appropriate, would we not want that the federal government to be open?
I think if those were the circumstances, that would be appropriate.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, obviously, you've got a tough job, I understand that. But the report is obviously critical in some individuals. Do you think the report was accurate, fair? Do you think it was unduly critical?
No, I don't think it was unduly critical. And again, this was a report that Dr. Marchenko requested and Mr. Zinser provided. We take it very seriously, and we're going to take a look at it.
You don't contest it, but then I guess we want two sets of things. One is some overall changes. You are going to look at these particular cases and seeing what the circumstances were that the Inspector General wrote about to appear to have been very unfair.
The question of the cases that he will be looking into, obviously I'm very anxious to see what the outcome of those will be as well, because I feel very strongly that it's important to look at these cases and to do a very close analysis of what all the facts are in these cases, because a great deal has been made of what they may represent. So I'm very anxious to find out.
I do think, again, we have an obligation not simply to stop mistakes going forward, but to undo them where they've had. I'll finish up Dr. Tango. I appreciate you said these are not, again, mostly on your watch. These are prior, and I appreciate your commitment to fix them. There's one other thing that has to be done. It's a statement, not a comment. You mentioned it. Part of what we're told is that the department has these exceptions and all these hoops and whirls. I think that is a recognition of the fact that there's too much rigidity on the basics. When there was a problem with the basic system, too much pressure is then engendered for this exception and that exemption, etc. And that's one reason why I think we need to have flexibility in the basic statute, so that instead of having to do these case by case, issue by issue, we can have some more flexibility overall. And that, I think, will reduce the complexity, reduces burden of compliance, both on the individual in the business and on law enforcement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Congressman Frank. Now, Mr. Jones, the Inspector General's report says that about 90% of your investigators are criminal investigators. His report also says that given the structure of the Magnuson-Stevens Act, that the office has a disproportionate number of criminal investigators. This raises a question about your own philosophy. Do you think that people who are in violation or could be in violation of regulations, where there are essentially administrative penalties, is it your opinion that they're criminals?
Absolutely not. And again, you raised the term that is his philosophy, and I have to take a very careful look at what he's presented to us. And
no, what's your philosophy, not his philosophy? Do you believe these people are criminals?
No, I do not believe they're criminals.
Why are you so many criminal investigators? I don't understand that. The
reason that we are in that we have criminal investigators in this position really goes back to the overall process in terms of what's occurred over the 40 years that the agency's been in existence. And
I'm not talking about 40 years, Mr. Jones. I'm talking about your experience. Why did you have so many criminal investigators? I don't understand.
The reason that we have criminal investigators is because they present to us the widest skill set and the deepest skill set that we have available to actually conduct the business that we have to conduct on a vast geographic and complex mission.
But the Inspector General says that according to the OLE, violations of the Act typically do not result in criminal charges. Most violations, such as exceeding catch limits, result in administrative penalties alone. I raise this question because if you bring a mindset to a task that's director's note to the Office for Law Enforcement staff in which you said, quote, "We really have nothing to fear coming as a result of the Office of Inspector General review. We need not ask permission to nor apologize for doing our job," unquote. Did you say that or did you write that?
Yes, I did.
And now that the IG report was out criticizing the job that you've done and the NOAA administrator has issued a reform plan, I wonder if you still feel that you and your leadership of the Office for Law Enforcement do not face any need to make any significant changes.
The letter was directed to our entire employee group, and it was directed in a manner that was intended to encourage people that were undergoing a great deal of morale stress in terms of
What do you think, though? What do you think?
At this point, as I stated earlier, we are going to do everything to follow Dr. Lutchenko's lead and to
Not we,
resolve the issue.
you. What do you think? Not what do we think. What do you think?
As I stated, I personally am committed to following through with the direction that I received and to making the appropriate changes and to go to the premise or the philosophy, if you will, that this leadership wants us to go in or directs us to go in. That's what I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Now, questions have been raised about your management of the asset forfeiture fund. The IG has found that the Office for Law Enforcement did not maintain customary internal controls over the asset forfeiture fund. And then they went ahead and commissioned an audit by forensic accountants. Are you as sure, and are you sure that the accountants won't find any wrongdoing? Since you've had custody of this for years, are you pretty sure that asset forfeiture fund was run on the up and up, no problem?
Yes, I'm very confident of that. The fund expenditures are spent in the same manner and with the same protocols as are the other appropriated funds within NOAA. This money goes into a NOAA account and we follow the protocols that NOAA has in place to spend money. In fact, there are some more restrictions on the expenditure of fund monies. As you well know, the Magnuson Act specifies what that money can be spent.
Well, let me ask you this. Isn't it true that you've taken the asset forfeiture fund, you charged it rather, for international travel that you've taken?
My office is not much. There may be some out of the Office of Law Enforcement.
Not your office, you.
Me personally, I don't believe I've done international travel. Most of my travel.
Let me ask Inspector General, do you have any evidence that Mr. Jones has taken an international travel using the asset forfeiture fund monies?
Sir, some of the preliminary results from the forensic review that we're doing does indicate that there's been international travel charged to that fund, and I do believe that it shows that it was travel charged to by Mr. Jones. Yes.
I'm going to take that up in the second round of questioning. Mr. Tierney, it's your time to ask questions for the second round.
Mr. Jones, prior to your appointment as the Chief of the Office of Law Enforcement, what experience have you had with regulating fisheries or enforcing fishery regulations?
None.
Have you done any enforcement of civil administrative violations versus criminal activity?
Nothing extensive, no. My background is primarily municipal law enforcement prior to my taking this position.
Sir, you recall in 2006, I think it was September 2006, that former Mayor John Bell, Senator Bruce Tarr, Representative Ann Margaret Ferrante, Louis Linquata, Jackie Odell, George McCabe from my office, and others came down to Washington to meet with you. And at that time, it was, I believe, Mr. Hogarth, to talk about the improper tactics that were being complained of, the fact that there were enforcement of fishery regulations that seemed to be severely questioned, derogatory language, imposition of appropriately high fees and penalties. Do you remember that visit?
I remember the visit, yes, sir.
Do you remember promising at the end of that visit that you would come to Gloucester and talk with everybody? And I assume that you do.
I remember it, and I do not want to be argumentative about it. There were some misunderstandings about the follow-up on that, and we did make an extensive number of attempts to follow through with our commitment in that regard.
Did you ever come directly after that and before the auction was raided at the end of 2006?
No.
So I guess, to be fair to you, I think what you're saying is you tried to get him, couldn't get him for some reason.
Yeah, there were some, again, yes.
What have you done or what did you do following that visit in September 2006 to remedy any of the problems that were raised?
I looked into the complaints that I was aware of and to determine what the background of those complaints were and to try to make some determinations as to whether there were actually any improper conduct or wasn't any improper conduct on behalf of our employees.
Can you tell me why you never established more formal guidelines for the use of the forfeiture funds?
The Magnuson Act has a direct set of specific areas that it can be used for. We follow that. And secondly, again, as I stated earlier, our use of the fund is done in the same manner as what we use other funds from throughout NOAA.
You're familiar with the Inspector General's findings in his report that the Northeast area suffered fines of $5.5 million, which is 2.5 times the amount for the next highest region and 5 times more higher than the other 4 regions. Given that, and given all the other information the Inspector General reported, the complaints that you've heard since 2006, you didn't think that some remedial action was necessary, both with the fund and with respect to responding to these complaints?
Let me just first state clearly that I do not hold responsibility for the attorneys and for the setting and establishment of funds. We investigate the cases and I pass those, my office passes those to the Office of General Counsel. But beyond that, to say that, did we follow through, did we look at that, once again, the fund expenditures are done in accordance with the same as any other NOAA account, so there's checks and balances along the way for that, and for looking at how appropriated money is spent as well as fund money. The actual fines that are levied and the levels of those, we've taken a look at, and there's some numbers in there, but again, that doesn't fall under directly under my responsibility, but I do know that NOAA will fall through.
I'm having a hard time, Mr. Jones, when I look at all of the complaints that have gone back to you directly and to NOAA from this community and others in the Northeast in particular, but elsewhere in the country as well. How is it that you know all of those complaints, that you're familiar with all of the situations, you now know the Inspector General's report, and all of the grievances that he cites in there, how you can put out a director's minute to your staff indicating that you see nothing, or you see nothing will be wrong on that basis? I think it shows that you're out of touch with what's going on in your agency.
Well, again, I have a great deal of respect for the Inspector General and what they would put forward. I have a great deal of confidence in our employees and what they did. And I wanted to be sure and just try to encourage them to get through this report and where they would be at. I have no doubt that there are, as if you read the entire memo, that we could have made mistakes and that there would be things that we'd look at and there may be changes we have to make. But again, to say that individual employees had anything to fear, that was my point of view.
You said that you had nothing to fear on that basis, and you also said you respect the fishing community, but you seem to give short shrift to their allegations and their complaints. Let me just summarize here for a second. Since 1998, the Inspector General has been reporting that the Office of Law Enforcement has a lack of policy direction and a lack of mission focus. It's reported that it recommended that NIMS develop specific enforcement priorities and goals for the OLE, which hasn't been done. That the OLE has a history of poor communication and mistrust, particularly in the Northeast. There's been at best only limited progress in improving transparency of the fishing management process. That under your watch, there's been continued, even exacerbated mistrust and lack of confidence, a continued lack of communication. That under your watch, the civil penalty assessment process continues to lack transparency and appears to be arbitrary and unfair. That there continues to be a failure to distinguish what is an appropriate penalty as opposed to what is an excessive fine in order to deter future violations and reflect the violations harm to the natural resources, particularly with regard to paper errors in the face of complex rules and data issues. Mr. Jones, why shouldn't Dr. Lachenko take some remedial action here, some personnel actions here to either discipline or fire you or somebody that's responsible for that continuing situation?
Well, once again, I think there's a lot more detail behind that, and I know that, again, I'll reiterate that my office is not responsible for setting the fines and penalties. However, I will say that as we look at the Inspector General's report, he has said that he will look at specific cases. To date, those cases have yet to be evaluated. I've always had a commitment to look at individual cases and to follow through and hold people accountable for violations and inappropriate conduct. And my track record will show that as well. And I'm committed to following through with what the Inspector General's recommended in the direction that leadership has and will give us, and I'm very capable and very committed to doing that.
Gentleman's time is expired. We'll certainly have another round. We're going to Mr. Frank. You may proceed, Council.
Following up on that, Mr. Jones, you said that you would take appropriate action if something was done wrong. Could we get have law enforcement officials, and I'm sure the majority of them are very hardworking and decent. Law enforcement is never an easy job. People don't like to be stopped for doing what they should do. But there are occasional excesses. It's important that we have good enforcement, but also protection. Have people been disciplined for the kind of abuses that the Inspector General talked about?
Yes, they have. We investigate some 15 to 20 what we call OPR, or Office of Professional Responsibility cases per year. We're an accredited agency. We're required to have that, and we have this.
Could we get without names necessarily, but just a list of the disciplinary actions that have been taken?
Again, I don't know what's appropriate with regard to that, but we.
What would be inappropriate about telling us the number of people that were disciplined and why, without even if we appropriate to make it up to the name, even if you leave the name aside, I'm not sure that's different. But I don't know why you couldn't give us a summary of the disciplinary actions that were listed.
I believe we could probably do that. I don't have those papers.
No, let me also ask, because we had that memory center. Were you surprised by Inspector Dale's report? Was it more critical than you expected?
Yes, I was actually.
All right, but that does go to Mr. Jimmy's point. You told me that you don't contest the Inspector General's report. And apparently, things are worse than you realized. So the question is, going forward, what do you do to prevent yourself from being surprised again? Now things were worse in your area than you thought they were. Committed to looking into education. What kind of structural, organizational changes do we have? How do we, what do you plan to implement? What policies to prevent these abuses and get you better informed so that you're not surprised by a subsequent report?
Well, we're going to conduct a workforce analysis that Dr. Luchenko has directed us to conduct, and we will take a look at how.
Workforce analysis means what?
I'm sorry. That means that we're going to take a look at the mix of criminal investigators versus non-criminal.
What about individuals? Yeah, but some of the people apparently didn't think they should have done. Is there a process for that?
There is a process for that in place, and we follow up when we find out there's
Again, but I said to you, Mr. Jones, what I said to the bank regulator on Friday, we would ask them about individual allegations that they were too hard, the banks weren't able to lend because the lack of lending activity is a serious problem. John Cleveland looked into that as well. You acknowledge a general problem, but every time we ask about a specific, they say things are doing okay. So there's a disconnect there. It can't be that your procedures that you've had them were good if you then were surprised by an unpopular report, or an unfavorable report. So we need to know what changes are you making that A, correct these things, and B, get you in a better position for them not to occur.
Well, again, we're going to be pulling additional data and information on what has occurred, what different cases are involved, and what processes are gone through. We're scrutinizing those more
The
closely.
data, you got some data. What do you do about it? Well, are you planning any structural changes? Changing the mix is one thing, but it does seem like there's serious deficiencies in the operation were revealed by a report that you do not contest. You say it was a fair report. You were surprised by how negative it was. It's not enough to say, well, we just need to get more information. Somebody, Dr. Chenko, and I understand you inherited this, but somebody better be thinking seriously about more than data analysis to prevent the recurrence of this situation. Again, very critical report that surprised the man in charge, and no one can test the report. So what do we do from here?
Well, again, I can only reiterate to you that we take it very seriously. We're going to follow the direction that we received, and we'll be looking at every aspect of what we do and making determinations on how we can make certain that it does not happen again.
And I assume we'll get some reports on that. And, I think there's a certain amount of skepticism. Dr. Chenko, I think just would add again, I continue to be convinced that, well, let me ask you, the fact that we have, and people said, the Inspector General said, there are a lot of exemptions. It's a very complex thing to administer public Thank you. Again, I would say, we disagree on this. Part of the problem is if you start with a very basic, rigid rule, then you generate a lot more exceptions. I think we put all the flexibility and the exceptions, and et cetera, et cetera. I think you need to go back to the statute. You can't correct an excessively rigid statute by a whole lot of regulation. I think you have to go back to the statute as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman Frank. Mr. Jones, the IG's report, when talking about the asset forfeiture fund, says that they were constraining their ability to examine the use of the asset forfeiture fund, that they're not aware of the fund ever having been audited, that the proceeds, an accounting for the proceeds seem to have weak internal controls and could not, and the IG could not readily determine how NOAA utilized the fund. Now, Mr. Jones, the IG has stated, evidence suggests that you have charged the asset forfeiture fund for international travel that you yourself have taken. And isn't it true that some or all of that travel was not case-related, since you don't work cases as head of an office of law enforcement? Mr. Jones.
I would have to, again, first await the specific findings to determine exactly what the accounting shows as to whether I personally was on the fund or on appropriated money that any expenses for my travel was charged to. I am not aware of my travel expenses being charged to the asset forfeiture fund. I have taken international travel. I have conducted that business on behalf of NOAA and strictly on behalf of NOAA only.